Who was Charlotte Perkins Gilman? This video seeks to answer that question by exploring a few different things. First, I'm going to highlight some of the important aspects of Gilman's life, as well as some major themes that she cared about, by exploring the themes in her novels Herland and With Her in Ourland, as well as how to find her works. Before going more into her biography and my own arguments about her works, I want to point out another reason I'm doing this video is because when you search Charlotte Perkins Gilman on YouTube, so much stuff comes up about the yellow wallpaper, and she is so much more than the yellow wallpaper. I'll scroll for a second, but almost everything that comes out on YouTube is about the same thing. And you'll occasionally see something about Herland, you might see something about one of her other short stories, but there's just so much yellow wallpaper. And I believe that Herland, and particularly With Her in Ourland, just deserve so much more attention than they've gotten. They're really exciting works, and unfortunately, all we teach is the yellow wallpaper. Not that it's a bad story, but, you know, she is more than a postpartum hysteria story. Gilman was born in 1860 in Connecticut. She was precocious from a young age and enrolled in the Rhode Island School of Design when she was 18. After turning down Charles Walter Stetson several times, she married him in 1884 and gave birth to her daughter the next year. Catherine would go on to write her mother's first biography. Gilman officially separated from Stetson in 1888. She would later marry Houghton Gilman, a marriage that would last into her death. She wrote the Forerunner and published it herself from 1909 to 1916. She died by suicide in 1935. She was one of the first few people to believe in euthanasia in that time period. She killed herself after living with breast cancer for 3 years. Her suicide was published widely in many newspapers. An excerpt. When all usefulness is over, when one is assured of unavoidable and imminent death, it is the simplest of human rights to choose a quick and easy death in place of a slow and horrible one. Carrie Chapman Catt, an American woman suffrage leader at that time, said, "A woman of her vigor would do exactly that to avoid trouble to her daughter with whom she lived and pain to herself. I think it was quite right in that. It wasn't cowardice as suicide is when people are afraid. She would have gone on as long as she could to be of any service to the world. She was a great woman." Not everyone reacted as well to Gilman's suicide, but many praised her for her decision. Before moving on to her works, I want to highlight some of her relationships. Much of Gilman's writing is about men and women's relationships, as well as gender roles, and for that reason I'm going to highlight her 3 main ones. Her marriage to Stetson was only after she turned him down several times. Before marrying him, he agreed that she could decide when and if they would have children. She also made sure that he would not expect her to perform many housewife or womanly duties. This kind of negotiation was incredibly rare for this time period. The birth of their child caused her to fall into a severe depression, and this experience was the impetus for the yellow wallpaper. They decided that divorce was the best way for her to recover her mental health. They divorced amicably, and Gilman later sent her daughter to live with Stetson and his new wife, who was a friend of Charlotte's. Gilman met Adeline Knapp during her separation from Stetson. Her biographer, Anne Lang, says that it is possible they were lovers, but not proven. In one letter, Gilman said, "Adeline Knapp has letters of mine, most fully owning the really passionate love I had for her. I told you that I loved her that way. You ought to know that there is a possibility of such letters being dragged out someday. Fancy San Francisco papers with a profound sensation in literary articles. Revelations of a peculiar past. Mrs. Stetson's love affair with a woman. Is this friendship?" and so on. The two broke up due to conflicting viewpoints and personalities. Knapp did not believe that women should vote, and Gilman did not share that belief. She later married Houghton Gilman, and felt that she had found a companion who was her intellectual equal, and who allowed her to complete her work. Houghton was Charlotte's first cousin, and she lived with him until his death. She began writing the Forerunner during her relationship with Houghton. In this magazine, she wrote every part and drew the illustrations herself. At first, she allowed advertisements, but only those she approved, and she would write the advertisements herself. Later, she decided to cut the ads out altogether. She used money from her speeches and other writings to fund her paper, and she had about 1,500 subscribers in it. To talk a little more about the Forerunner, I'm going to go to the HathiTrust Digital Library. So as you can see here, you can have access to a lot of her original works, like actually how they appeared in the magazine from this. So I'm going to go into the first copy of the Forerunner that was published. So here is the main image that comes with it, and then almost like every copy would have poems, short stories, and then parts of her own novel. And her earlier versions would have the ads, so this one would have advertisements in it. So you can see she's the owner and publisher. Costs about $1 a year, 10 cents a copy. She would have quotations, and everything in this was written by Gilman. So if you want to know more about her, or write more about her short stories, or look at any of her work, go into this, flip through it. HathiTrust is really a great place for this. I won't flip through any more, but I will go back to the other screen and say you can look at several other editions here. And then there are also similar items. So this is just a really great resource for learning more about Gilman. If you want to see more of her works, you can also go to the wiki page and look at her bibliography. So just to kind of show off just how prolific she was, I'm going to scroll through this. So she had poetry collections, short stories, lots of short stories, novels and novellas, dramas, dialogues, nonfiction. She published in other newspapers as well, and then her self-publication, obviously, and then her lectures also. So she also went and did a lot of lecturing. And there's been just like a ton of academic scholarship on her, so definitely check her out if you're interested in learning anything more about her, and maybe read something that other people don't read as often. So look into her works. You can also find some of her works on the Charlotte Perkins Gilman Digital Collection on the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University's website. So this is a brand new digital library. It really hasn't been out for that long. And you can go through so much of her stuff. So as you can see on the side here, there's different collections, stuff divided by whether she wrote it, was it in her diary, names associated, people associated, where was she when she was writing it, different topics. So this is just an incredible resource. And I will say, it has some interesting items. So like pieces of her hair, which I find a little creepy, but still pretty cool. So definitely go and check out this website. It is a great place to start if you're doing research on her. Now I want to dive a little more into the Forerunner itself and talk about its purpose. To do that, I want to read you the poem on the first page of the Forerunner. The newsstands blooms with magazines. They flame, they blaze indeed. So bright the cover's colors glow, so clear the startling stories show, so vivid the pictorial scenes, that he who runs may read. Then this. It strives in prose and verse, thought, fancy, fact, and fun, to tell the things we ought to know, to point the way we ought to go, so audibly to bless and curse, that he who reads may run. And as you can probably tell from this poem, Gilman published this work with an agenda. She wanted to wake people up to women's condition in society and create a society in which community was paramount and women and men were each other's equals. Both Herland and With Her and Ourland illustrate the problem that Gilman sees in the economy, the structure of society, and men and women's relationships. Herland was mostly forgotten and not published in book format until Anne Lane published her edition in 1979. In this novel, 3 men stumble into the hidden world of Herland, a land with only women who have lived without men for many generations. The women live in a society where the home and the public sphere are interlaced. The men find the women's society to be clean and beautiful, and Van, one of the men, is surprised by how human he finds the women. Having never been held back by the supposed patriarchy of the outside world, the Herland women have thrived but remained isolated from the world. In the companion novel, With Her in Ourland, Elidor, a Herlander, travels with her new husband Van, an American, around the world to see what the rest of the world is like, with particular attention to women's rights, the economy, and the home. Taken together, both novels attempt to show what a society could be like if women and men were raised and treated equally. This novel strives to break down the meanings of masculine and feminine, as well as what it means to have full personhood. To talk a little more about what these feminine and masculine characteristics are, I have recreated Linda McDowell's list of binary distinctions. I've added grid lines and color to her chart. I hope she doesn't mind. So over here in blue, and I picked the stereotypical colors on purpose, we have the masculine. So in this time period, the masculine was considered public spaces, outside, working, production, independence, and really power. While the feminine was the private, inside, in the home, leisure and pleasure versus work, consuming instead of producing, depending instead of being independent, and having a lack of power. These categories are really blurred and changed in Herland. In fact, I would call the Herlanders very purple, as they had a mix of everything. Due to being isolated and without men for over 2,000 years, the Herlanders have no recent history of sex distinction that tells them what is manly and what is womanly. And in this way, Gilman posits that they're able to fully develop as humans, unburdened by the traditional concepts. Van describes them as being women plus, and so much plus that when they did not choose to let the womanness appear, you could not find it anywhere. Terry is the character Gilman uses to continuously point out the lack of traditional femininity in Herland. He explains that they're neither the vices of men nor the virtues of women. They're neuter. Neuter is an interesting word there, so he sees them as sexless due to their unwomanliness. He is angry that the women have no patience, no submission, none of that which is the natural yielding that is woman's greatest charm. And at this point, Van, the other character, goes very angry with Terry and tells him that the women actually have the virtues of humanity. And again in this, he reinforces that the Herlanders are not like typical women. Instead, they have fully developed in their capacities and are thus exemplifying humanity's virtues instead. Gilman kind of exemplifies this chart and the characteristics further and the way she designs the characters. So there are 3 men and 3 women who are all paired up in the end. Van, the main character who narrates a lot of the time, has a mix of masculine and feminine characteristics. Terry is very masculine. He fights and he questions women's authority. He later attempts to rape one of the women, so he's kind of the very negative characteristics of masculinity. And then Jeff kind of puts women on a pedestal. He kind of has that angel in the house kind of feeling, so he thinks that women are better than men, are more virtuous, which is also problematic. Differently problematic than Terry's masculinity, but equally it's not seeing women as the same as men. And then there are the women they meet. Elidor, it has a mix of masculine and feminine characteristics. She is paired with Van ultimately, and she's highly intelligent, and she kind of narrates a lot of the story as well, especially as we get into the last novel. Alima is paired with Terry. Gilman calls her very atavistic. She gets angry a lot, and she also doesn't kind of have the perfect characteristics. Celeste is paired with Jeff, and I kind of labeled her angelic. She doesn't appear much, but she does enjoy the way Jeff views her, so she's not the same as like Elidor and Van are. She's a little different. All of these characters kind of interact, but the main ones I'm going to end up following are Elidor and Van, as they are the 2 characters that leave and explore the world together in the next novel. The first theme I want to explore is who is human and who is people in the novel. This pops up a lot. In the very beginning, Van kind of observes that the Herlanders were making people. And whether someone is fully human or not seems to be dependent on their gendered characteristics. Those who have an equal balance of the supposed feminine and masculine characteristics are seen as people. And essentially in this society, the children are raised to be able to fully participate as citizens, and they're encouraged to develop and follow their own interests from an early age. This allows these girl children to become people, unlike what Gilman considers the women in the outside world. those women who were not afforded the same flexibility in community care. So people, in this sense, are those who have been allowed to develop and raise themselves to their fullest potential. She really considers human qualities coming from being able to exercise a wide range of arts and crafts, and really the extension of knowledge. Another theme that pops up is home. She says, Elidor at one point with her in Ourland says, "You think home, you talk home, you work home, where you should from earliest childhood be seeing life in terms of the community." Gilman kind of erases these masculine and feminine boundaries in Herland, and in doing that, there is no boundary between work and home. The women who have children will usually raise them, maybe up to 2 years, but then most of the children are given to other women who enjoy that kind of work. And those women who give their children up are allowed to visit them, yes, and see them, but they're also allowed to have their own career and do their own thing in the society. The other Herlanders work as scientists, architects, teachers, and more. Then in the Herlanders, as I said from the chart earlier, with the production and consumption, the Herlanders are doing both. They contribute fully to the society, unlike women in the real world who were kind of told, stay at home and don't participate in economics. Don't, kind of practice your citizenship and vote. So, and then we go into, the absence of homes. There are no physical homes in Herland. Everyone kind of lives communally. So there are no, family units. And Van later mentions that the Herlanders don't even have an exact analog for the word home, any more than they had for the word family. So Gilman has really set up something that's totally different from what we have in society, and she's kind of trying to show what would it be like if women were not contained to the home. What would it be like if everyone was raised to kind of be in society? Another kind of theme in this story is Van upholding the United States as the best place for women in the world. He kind of says, well, women in my society actually are okay. And he keeps trying to reinforce this to Elidor. Whether he believes that or if he's just trying to prove that to himself, you can decide. When they first leave and they decide to explore, he keeps saying, wait till you see my country. And they later observe the Japanese, who, Elidor says, have a dual duty of childbearing and manservice that dominates their lives, and that they aren't people at all. Somehow just wives, or worse. So we kind of loop back to the idea of who is people. And Van tells her, well, the women in America are people. But when she finally meets the women in America, she's really disappointed. Van remarks at how Elidor seemed more at a loss with the women than with the men, seemed not to know quite how to approach them. It was not for a lack of love and sympathy, far from it. She was eager to make friends with them. She made friends with men on the human side, rather than attracting them by her femininity, and as human beings they exchanged ideas and got on well together. The women were not so human, had a less wide outlook, less experience as a rule. When she did not get near enough to one of them for talk at all intimate, they came from the ultra-feminine point of view, the different sense of social and moral values, the peculiar limitations of their position. And she only meets 2 exceptions that she points out, who are a doctor and a researcher worker in biology. And she really gets fed up with the women. She says, how can they bear this position, Van? How can they stand it another day? Don't they know they are women? And here Gilman capitalizes the W in women. And Van replies, no, they think they are women, with a little capital letter. So they have a very different institution than what Elidor has been raised in, and she is just totally baffled by this. And then Van says how those outside of Herland think of the words men, man, manly, manhood. And when they think of those, they see men in action, men fighting, men doing, and in general, the world. But when these same people think of women, they only think of female, the sex, and nothing more than that. But while in Herland, the word woman comes with the whole history of Herland and with women participating and fully in society. However, Elidor does appreciate the suffragettes in America. She says at least the suffragettes are women after all. They are people, and women are the people, really up to a certain point. And she really kind of shudders at the anti-suffragettes. And she tells Van, if you want one all-sufficient and world-convincing proof of the degradation of women, you have it in the anti-suffragette. Elidor concludes that what prevents the women in their world of fully participating is their dwarfed condition, not being people, real world-building people. And what keeps them dwarfed is this amazing relic of the remote past, the domestic position that they feel trapped in. And even Van remarks that college professors, teachers, writers, many women showed similar intelligence, but often wore strained, nervous look when they were calm as cows, for all their evident intellect. And a comment does sound, on the surface a little sexist, but I think most of the point of this is, in the real world, the women just cannot do what they can do in Herland. They can't follow their passion, and they can't leave the home. The last theme I want to explore is Christianity and the patriarchy in the novel. And I would say that With Her in Ourland, the second novel in particular, is first and foremost a critique of the patriarchy triad, the conditions of marriage and the home, and the treatment of women intersecting with those. And Gilman starts with a critique of Christianity at one point in the book. She meets a preacher. And Elidor thinks there might be something mother-like about the religion at first. However, she determines that Christians seem to fight among themselves and try to heal others rather than eliminating the core cause of their problems. She disagrees with the interpretation of Jesus that most Christians seem to have made, and she argues that love your neighbor means social unity, that your neighbor was yourself, that we are all one humanity. And she thinks the concept of heaven is foolish. For Herlanders, the continuation of their species is immortality, not the continuation of an individual. She explains that the problem is that back of your Christian religion is the Hebrew, back of that the family. It all comes down to the absurd root of the proprietary family. She then calls that old boss father behind God, and the personal concept of God as father with his special children, his benign patronage, his quick rage, an ugly picture. And she argues that when kings were established, they crystallized the whole thing. She describes the father of the house as the king's ancestor. Elidor believes that the authority cripples the democracy of the United States. She calls the authority method something that requires no effort and no responsibility. And she kind of constructed Herland, Gilman did, with its lack of central government as a direct contrast to this setup in the United States. So she really sees a lot of the problem in that everyone is in their particular home in the United States and they're only worried about themselves. They're not worried about their community. And what she wants to happen is for everyone to be kind of more concerned with other people in their lives. Not whether they're going to go to heaven, but whether their species will survive. And kind of helping everyone, lifting up everyone so that all are equal. In conclusion, I kind of just wanted to point out how some of Gilman's ideas haven't really been touched on. They're not really talked about as much outside of her one famous story, The Yellow Wallpaper. In a later video, I will be looking at Herland, as well as, I think, the New Human Rights Movement, that book, and kind of talking about what are the solutions for some of these problems in society, and whether her critiques of America are still relevant today. For this video, my goal was just kind of to inform you about her and maybe spark some interest. So if you're interested, give this video a like and stick around for the next installation on Herland. Thanks for watching.